Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. Welcome to this Whitetria webinar on everything OneDrive administration. My name is Ben Manesi. I work here as head of products at Whitetria, and I'll be your host today. Very excited to have you here. We have a whole lot of things to discuss. We're gonna keep this short and sweet. We have about 30 minutes that we'll spend with a very quick introduction to who we are, then move on to some of the administration challenges when it comes to OneDrive and sharing within the organization. These are going to be challenges that we hear from our customer base, and we'll see how to address them during a live demo of Sapio 365. So that's pretty much our agenda for today. Let's get started. A little bit about us. We've been around for quite some time now, founded in '99 in Montreal, but we also have offices in Latin America as well as in Europe. Historically, we come from the IBM world, where we help enterprises with their software administration and development. And for that reason, we actually have over 500 customers spanning over pretty much all countries in the world, as well as half the S&P 500. So we help enterprises for a long time now. And we started with Sapio 365 last summer. So we went GA in summer 2018, and it's been extremely well received. We're very, very excited about it. It's a product that helps you with your Office 365 administration and even delegation in the organization. We'll take a look at this a little bit later. But let's get down to business. Let's talk about what most customers face challenges with when it comes to OneDrive. One of the number one things to talk about here is that OneDrive is private by default. So how do you access a user's OneDrive directory? A quick Google search reveals that this is not impossible, right? However, it takes about 10 clicks to do per user, and it's only available user by user, and you need to be a global administrator to be able to do so. Now, what you get when you access somebody's OneDrive, and it's important to say here, when we talk about a OneDrive directory that's connected to a user, we are talking about a SharePoint site collection that's a personal site collection, right? So when we'll talk about sharing and permissions, standard SharePoint sharing and permissions principles will prevail here. Now, when you access a user's OneDrive directory, what you get is a file system view. There is no way for you to really see what's in those folders or to really establish the volume of data that that user has and thereby their adoption level, if you like. The other challenge that we hear about frequently is permissions. So how do I see what files were shared by that user and with whom? This is available when you access a user's OneDrive, but it's only available file by file, right? So you really don't get an overview here. The second major issue that we hear about is auditing the sharing status of OneDrive items. How do you normally do this in Office 365? Well, this requires audit log searches, right? And so by default, the audit log is disabled, which I'm not saying that's the best practice. So pretty much all the organizations that we work with have their audit logs enabled. However, there is the question of audit log retention, right? And so the interesting thing here is that this differs between user and user depending on the user license. So for example, if you're looking at a user with an E3 license, their audit log would only be available for 90 days. Whereas for users with an E5 license, the audit log is available for 1 year. The other problem that I see with this is that the audit log is event-based. So it will focus on the actual sharing event, and there are a lot of available triggers. But say that I'm searching for my audit log for a specific user, and I use a regex or some sort of other filter to find sharing events where a file was shared. Now, if that file was unshared later, this is a false positive that I would find. So there's really no way to get a status on all of those user files in one place. Not to mention that the output of this search is a CSV, which definitely is not action enabled, right? A third issue that we encounter quite often is user termination and what happens with their files. Now, by default, the OneDrive cleanup job will leave their data intact for 30 days. And you do have controls over this, right? You can reduce the amount of time that their data is kept there, but there are issues with this, because what if they shared their files with some coworkers and they're still working on those files? You don't want to get them removed automatically. However, you also do not want to have that user be able to access their OneDrive directories for a period of 30 days after they've been terminated, right? So this is also a challenge that we'll address with SAP 365 in just a minute. The fourth problem here is, how do you audit sharing for Office 365 groups? Now, some of these groups might belong to your finance department or other departments that share sensitive data. By default, it is possible to share files that were initially shared within a group with the outside. How do you get a handle of this? Well, this requires content search, right? So eDiscovery and Compliance Center, you must be a member of the eDiscovery Manager group, not to mention that setting up these content search requests is extremely, extremely tricky. Just the manual to do so is about 10 pages when you look at it from the Microsoft documentation side of things. It also returns a lot of false positives. For example, when you start searching for files by the extension that allows you to look at files that are accessible to the outside or to externals, you will find a lot of ASPX pages, right? So you will need to fine tune your request, not to mention that this search, the content search, does not consider sharing policy changes. So let's say that you change the sharing policy, and so it will still show files as being shared, whereas they are not being shared anymore. Not to mention when a certain file was shared with an outside individual by their email address, but they didn't accept the sharing email just yet. In that case, the file is effectively being shared, but the individual didn't accept the request, and so the content search will not show this file as being shared. So this is a really quick overview of some of the common problems that we hear about. Let's see how we address this with SAP 365. Now, a little bit of info about what this product is all about. SAP 365 is a locally installed unified administration client that literally takes a couple of clicks to install. Download it from our website, whitetria.com/SAP365, install it, and connect into your tenant directly. Now, your data is kept completely secure, and this is super important for us. So it means we're talking about a locally installed client that connects directly into your tenant, and none of your sensitive data flows through us in any way. You will see a lot of really cool stuff when we look at the demo, and you might be wondering, how do we do all this from a security standpoint? Well, SAP 365, being the locally installed client that it is, will need an Azure AD registered application to give it permissions to do stuff in your tenant, right? We will see a mode called the Ultra Admin mode, which you can find a lot more info about on our website, but essentially this means that you register an application in your tenant, you're in control of what permissions you assign to said application, and then SAP 365 will be able to access users' OneDrives, even messages, metadata, and a lot more than that. Now, with SAP 365, looking at OneDrive is only one piece of the pie. It's a product that allows you to manage pretty much everything in your Office 365 tenant, from users to groups to OneDrive, even messages, SharePoint sites, and more. You can create reports in just a few clicks, update user properties, groups, or even manage memberships or message rules in bulk, and you can use it to delegate certain administration duties, even restrict your administrators by geography, or department, or a lot more than that. As far as OneDrive goes, what we do in SAP 365 is we can manage individual users' OneDrives as well as multiple users' OneDrive directories at once. We can also work with OneDrive files shared within groups as well as SharePoint sites. Now, I'm not really big on using slides, so let's actually dive in and take a look at a demo. This is what the SAP 365 interface looks like. I have downloaded it from our website. Like I said, it takes 2 clicks, got it installed on my computer. And if I was to use it for the first time, I would just open an admin session, log into my tenant, give consent, and I'm good to go. In this case, I'm going to be using what we call an ultra admin session, which requires that I register an application on my tenant. We give you all the instructions on how to do this, and it really doesn't take more than 2 minutes to do so. But in turn, this mode will allow me to look at my users and all of their OneDrives in one place. Now let's actually pull a list of users by clicking the Show Complete List of Users. You'll see that the process is extremely fast, and it gives me a grid with all of my users in a tenant, along with over 60 properties and settings, including some of the Exchange Online settings, as well as licenses and more. Like I said, there's a lot to this product. So let's focus on OneDrive for now. Now I'm going to analyze this info real quick. I'm going to look at users by sign-in status, because I don't want to look at users that are blocked from signing in. And then I can even look at their assigned licenses so that I can focus on a specific group of people. I'm going to select EMS Premium, that would equal E3. And if I was to retrieve those users' OneDrive directories, I will simply click on OneDrive Files and have the process load those directories for me. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to save you the time of looking at this, and I actually prepared this, but I promise you'll see the process live later on. It's super fast. This is the interface that I get with all those users and their directories, along with the files they have in their OneDrives. You see that some of these users don't have OneDrive licenses, or they don't have a OneDrive directory at the moment. But the really cool thing here is that we display all the data in our Flexi Grid, which means we can analyze this information by any aspect we'd like to. So grab the icon column, for example, and get a quick handle on the sorts of files that are being stored by these users. I can quickly look at files that I don't want to see in here. For example, there's an executable file, which is not something I want my users to have in their OneDrives. So I can decide what I want to do with it, because like I said, everything we do in SAP 365 is action enabled. So I could go ahead and delete that file directly from here. I could download it and sandbox it to take a look at what it does, or I could even rename it directly from here. Now let me show you, this is not a training video, right? But I just want to show you some of the things you're able to do from here. So let's look at my users and try to understand their usage of OneDrive. I have categorized all those OneDrive items by the user that they belong to. And then I can do stuff like going to the grouping settings and applying totals on the file size, where I can quickly gather a total of the a summary of all those file sizes. I can even categorize. I can even sort my users based on how much data they're using, and thereby understand a little bit about the volume and adoption of OneDrive in my organization. What's even better than that is that in order to create a report from this, all I need to do is select some or all the entries in the grid, do a simple Control-C, Control-V, and put this info into an Excel sheet, which really doesn't take more than a few clicks, right? So I just created a global report of all those selected users and their OneDrive adoption and usage. Good. Now, one more thing that we can do from here, which is really cool, is we can go ahead and load up the permission information on these users as well. So one of the things I could do is I could go ahead and, well, I need to make sure that I'm in the right screen here. Sorry about that. So in order to understand my permissions, I can select one or multiple files. In fact, I could even select multiple users and all of their directories and all their files, and then load their permission information. Now, what this will do is it will go through the files, locate the ones that are actually being shared, and it will not only tell me that those files were being shared, but also will get the information who those files were shared with. For example, the Denver income data has been shared with 22 internal users, and we can even see the usernames directly here. If we go up a little bit, we can even see that some of these files were shared with the outside using anonymous links, right? Now, this is also a place where I want to make a decision. For example, I would say that this particular file in question, which I believe is the executable file that we're looking at, let's say that this is sensitive data. I don't want this file to be shared with outside individuals and without a way to control it. So I could simply select the file and delete those permissions and thereby stop the sharing. All right. Now, we have something on the left-hand side that we call the Job Center. The Job Center includes a bunch of macros, if you like, automated jobs that we hear from our users and customers they find really, really useful. So, for example, I could quickly click on the Shared as Anonymous job that will essentially go through the grid, load up the permission information, and then do all the filter, sort, and grouping operations that I need to be able to retrieve what files were actually shared with anonymous links to the outside. Now, this is the longest waiting time that we have in this demo. So in the meantime, you can see that there are a bunch of other jobs available. We'll take a look at the duplicates job that allows us to identify files with the same hash information, as well as you can always suggest new jobs using this little button on the bottom. So you just tell us what you want to see here, and we'll build it for you in the next release. Now, we're finishing our report. We just found the 2 files that were shared with anonymous links to the outside. Like I said, we have controls over this. We could download the files for inspection. We could delete the permissions and stop the sharing, or we could even delete the files completely. So that is how we work with anonymous links, anonymous files. Now, if I take a look at my duplicates, I'm not actually sure that I will find something here, but let's give it a try. No, I did not select enough users. Anyway, should I have multiple files stored by multiple users that are exactly the same, we could very quickly identify those directly from here as well. Now, let's go back to my user's interface. As you can see, OneDrive is only one piece of the things that we do here, but let's focus on this for now. If you remember, we mentioned data retention and user termination. How do we deal with this stuff? Well, let's take an example. Let's again take a look at my users by sign-in status, locate some of the users that are blocked from signing in. As you can see, they still have some licenses assigned to them, which is essentially a bit of a waste if we think about it. So we could use the licenses module to remove those licenses. But what I'm really interested in is, okay, what are the OneDrive items in their directories? So I'm going to select a few of these users and pull up their OneDrive directories real quick, so that we can inspect what they have in their OneDrives and decide what we want to do with it. One of the big questions here is, okay, I found that out of the 3 users that I've selected, it's only Enrico that still has some files in there. Now, keep in mind that these files might also be synced to his computer, right? So before I make a decision on this, I might want to categorize those files by their sharing status, which tells me that there is actually 3 files that were shared with internal or external coworkers. I can, again, quickly load up the permission information on this so that I can understand who those files were shared with. I could quickly grab this part of the data and export it so that I have a report of what I'm seeing here. But for the rest of the files, I could quickly decide to download the files, archive them somewhere locally, which I can do really, really quickly. So you can see that we're downloading the files right now. And once they've been downloaded, I simply say I want to remove those files. And with any changes, any bulk changes you do from Zapier to Shopify, you will have to save those changes. That's sort of a 2-step verification, just to be sure that you don't make any mistakes. And then once the data was saved, you can go ahead and go back to the initial interface. All right, now I'm not going to save this just in case I want to leave my demo a little bit intact here, but this is a way to archive and inspect offboarding users' OneDrive directories. Another thing that's really cool here is we have a bunch of Job Center jobs, which I encourage you to look at in the users module as well. One of these will allow me to actually export the content of all these selected users. This works with multiple users as well. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do this, but I've prepared it before so that you can see what it looks like. This is essentially the export that I would get for this user. You would get all of their OneDrive files downloaded. You would get all of their contacts, license info, group memberships, even message rules, and their messages metadata as well. So this is essentially creating a digital footprint of those users locally on your computer with no effort whatsoever. So that is how we can help offboard users. And now let's talk a little bit about groups. So as we know, we can actually share files within groups as well, right? Specifically Office 365 groups. So let's pull up my groups and teams module, which is where we get a list of all the groups, even teams enabled groups that we have in the environment. As usual, we give you all of the information about those groups. So that's a significant amount of properties, including all of your teams related settings. I could actually load these using the Control-L shortcut or just saying load more information. However, what I'm interested in here is looking at my groups by group type, locating everything that's an Office 365 group, and let's select a few of these guys, including my finance group, and take a look at what are the files that were shared within those groups. Now, we're going to load the exact same module that we saw with the same controls and the same actions available as what we saw with our users. You can see that we can see, for example, everything that was shared within the finance group. And of course, an important question here is, who were those files shared with? Now, as with individual users, we can load up our permission information for individual groups as well. And we can quickly identify the files that were shared within the organization as well as with the outside. This is really critical because we're looking at financial data. And as you can see, we show you the target. We show you if those files were shared with a specific group, such as finance members, visitors. There's actually another group in here as well. And unfortunately, the only thing we can show you here as far as outside users is that it has been shared with at least one outside individual. The reason for this is that when sharing files with the outside, Office 365 considers the email address that the file was shared with as a key to authenticate to access the file, but at least we can see that this file was shared with one outside individual, and we can take actions on it as well. We can delete those permissions and stop the sharing if that is what we want to do. Now, we mentioned retention and offboarding of users. It's only fair that we talk about that for groups as well. We could always select one or multiple groups and then use the export content of all selected groups, which will result in, again, a locally saved copy of their digital footprint, including all of the information that we manage in SAP 365, such as their members, owners, delivery management, accepted and rejected senders, all the OneDrive files that were shared within and their locally saved copies, the group calendars, conversations, and even the group channels, should we be talking about Teams-enabled groups and those conversations and their metadata, okay? So that's also a pretty handy job center job for groups management. Now, there's one more aspect that we need to talk about when it comes to OneDrive, which is SharePoint sites and how to deal with files shared within SharePoint. Now, what we do in this module is we give you a list of all of your sites within the organization, within the tenant. You can select one or multiple sites and work with various things. You can load up all the files that were shared within. You could look at the list, as in the actual data containers, and even their content, such as item level data, as well as we're working on finalizing managing permissions for SharePoint, right? So to be able to answer the question, who can access what when it comes to my SharePoint sites within the organization. This is what we get as far as the files being shared within SharePoint sites. We can talk about files that were shared as part of document libraries or otherwise. And again, we have the same controls over them as what we've seen with users and groups. So that is a quick overview of some of the controls you have over sharing when it comes to OneDrive files. There is one more very, very important thing, which is delegation of various admin roles. We will do a separate webinar on this very subject, but let me show you something really cool. This comes from a customer in the education industry, and they wanted to have a better understanding of what their users, what their students are actually storing in their OneDrive directories. And there's a lot of funny stories there. But essentially what they wanted to do is they wanted to allow their local administrators to see and manage what their students have in their OneDrive, but they did not want to grant access to the OneDrive of faculty members, right? We have a lot of larger customers that are multinationals. And so one of the questions that comes up from them is, can we grant access to SAP 365, but have our administrators in France only manage users in France, or administrators in a specific department only manage other users in that department? This is what we created our role-based access control delegation for. It's actually pretty simple to set up. You create a set of credentials, which is self-explanatory. Then you create a scope, and I went ahead and created one for OneDrive management. The idea being, I want my designated administrators for OneDrive to be able to manage the OneDrive directories of every user, except for the ones where the department value equals executive management. So basically, I want to exclude my executive team from the OneDrive overview that SAP 365 provides. So I created a scope definition for this. And then I have created a role where I want these designated admins to be able to manage those OneDrive directories, but I do not want them to be able to download or even rename OneDrive files. So as you can see in this interface, we can set up roles, including all of what SAP 365 is capable of doing. For the OneDrive management side of things, I have excluded the rename OneDrive files permission, as well as the download OneDrive files permission. And then I have assigned the scope, which will limit the operation to everybody except for the executive management department. And I have assigned this role to Maya. So let's see how this works in real time. When I switch over to Maya's account, we'll see that the role becomes available. Note that you can actually restrict and enforce this role-based access control configuration. So should you set up numerous roles in your organization, those users will only be able to see and manage your users and your tenant using those roles. So I'm going to choose the available role here and use the OneDrive read, write, no download role. Now, once this is activated, I will pull a list of users, and you will see right away that for the sake of this example, I actually decided to show the users that are out of scope. You can see that there's a bunch of users where it says I'm unauthorized. And as I go a little bit to the right, you'll see that the reason for this is that they belong to the executive management. And for these users, you can see that the user management tab does not allow me to do pretty much anything. For the ones where I am allowed to modify stuff and to access their OneDrives, I can quickly select one or multiple users, pull up their OneDrive directories, and you'll see that the moment this completes, and like I said, I promised I will show you this operation live, we will be able to inspect those files, categorize them by extension, load the permission information, even delete them. However, we are not able to download or rename those files. So this is a way to restrict what your administrators can do. And there is a lot more to this. Like I said, watch this space for a future webinar on the role-based access control subject. But this is what takes SAP 365 to the level of an enterprise Office 365 management solution. So let's go back to my presentation real quick. What did we talk about here? We talked about the fact that as far as OneDrive goes, SAP 365 gives you 360 degrees visibility, everything that your users have in their OneDrive directories or that have been shared within groups or even SharePoint sites are available. You can control what is being shared with whom and even edit file permissions by even folder, individual files. You can take action on everything that you see. And this is true not only for the OneDrive module, but for everything else within the product. You can quickly organize and clean up your environment, remove duplicate files, automate most of what you're doing. And you can let us know what you want to see automated using our Job Center, and use the role-based access control delegation to create and enforce specific roles and scopes. Note that you will need Cosmos DB for this, but find more information on our website on this very subject. Having said this, thank you so much for taking the time out to watch this webinar. We would love to have any of your questions or feedback or ideas. Feel free to reach out at sales@whitetria.com or support@whitetria.com, and we really hope to see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your days.